Welcome back to the Maversify podcast, guys. Today we have a very, very special guest and someone who we think a lot of you will gain a tremendous amount of value from. For this episode, think of it like a guide on how to succeed in your job applications regardless of your background, where you came from, and actually how to really beat the odds when it comes to securing a career in London. 5 years ago, me and our guest today started out as starry-eyed kids from two very different parts of the world, far, far from London, just trying to find opportunity in the big city. Our guest today is a strategy consulting analyst. So for the future consultants, this is actually a perfect episode. He was a former intern at some of the largest investment firms in the world, like Fidelity in London, and overall just a stand-up guy. He's helped so many students navigate careers, including me, prepare for interviews, brush up their CVs, and stand out as an international student rather than fade out, which tends to happen to a lot of international students in London. Introducing Neeraj Asnani.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We're super happy to have you here. And since one of the aims of the podcast is to actually clarify different career paths and explain what people actually do there, why don't we start with this? And could you please just tell us what consulting actually is in your words?
Yes. First of all, thank you for a very kind introduction. That's really sweet. And yes, for background, I am a strategy analyst at Accenture. So where I work is within strategy consulting, and it's a part of consulting which can be kind of described into several brackets. So consulting can be broken down into strategy consulting, management consulting, technology consulting, operations consulting, and so on, right? And each type of this consulting focuses on slightly different things. So strategy consulting is focused mainly on like high level strategic decisions. So for example, a business is having an issue with the profitability. They don't know why it's going down, but they know that it's going down. And they take the help of consultants to figure out why it's going down and like what can be done to help. Management consulting is another type of strategy consulting, but like it focuses on slightly lower level decisions. So for example, a client wants to implement a solution to listen more to their customers and in order to change their business accordingly. So a management consultant's job would be to help them figure out what would be the best way to implement the solution, what would be the benefit that can be derived from it. So it's slightly it is very similar to strategy consulting, but at a slightly lower level. Technology consulting focuses, as the word says, on tech. So how businesses can leverage so much of the new technology that's out there in the world in order to drive significant business value. And the same thing with like operations consulting, which focuses more on business operations rather than strategy. So it can be divided into all these different segments. But overall, what makes consulting unique is that it is so broad, and what we do in like one sentence is help our clients reach their aims, and their aims can be related to some of the problems that they're facing, related to things such as profitability or customer retention and so on. But it can also be due to their strategic ambitions. So recently we helped a client expand their presence internationally. They were a very strong player in the domestic market, but not so much in the international market, right? And you, as strategy consultants, your job would be to understand what are the different markets out there that would have appetite to the type of work that our client does, and which would be the markets that we should prioritize, and what should be the way in which they can enter the market, because there's so many entry strategies, there are so many partnerships that they could make, and it's our job to break all of these complex ideas, all of these various options, and contextualize that into what our client needs and help them build a strategy accordingly.
This is such a good way of explaining it.
Yeah, I've never actually heard it like broken down that well in terms of tech and strategy. And I think a big question that a lot of people have is this idea between management consulting and strategy consulting, and what's the difference? And
sure. So technically, when you look at it, management consulting is the bigger umbrella, and strategy consulting is a part of it.
Okay.
So strategy consulting would then focus solely on those higher level strategic decisions.
Okay.
So your clients would be more like the C-suite of the company, or like the strategy leads and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And it focuses on like long-term business level goals. So a market entry is a big decision for a company, right? And that would be and that has a lot to do with what the business strategy is currently, what the client wants the strategy to be, and how this fits into that landscape. But management consulting applies this exact same skills, the exact same level of thinking, but it might be slightly more specialized. So it can be, for example, helping. So as I said, right, when a client wants to learn a little bit more about the customers, it's something that they already have an idea of, and they want a solution to come in. They want to know how they can do it. So it can be slightly more, management consulting could be slightly more specialized in that way, and compared to strategy consulting, which can take into account slightly higher level decisions.
And at what point do you actually choose which type of consulting you want to do? Do you apply straight away to a particular type, or
that's a good question, because there are a lot of ways to slice this pie. So a lot can also be done by the firms that you apply to, right? So for example, when you apply to a firm such as Bain, which focuses very highly on these strategic decisions, you're almost always going to do that strategic work. McKinsey does a combination of the two. So they do a lot of this high level strategic decisions, but they also do a lot of business transformation, which can be more related towards management consulting. There are certain firms such as, there are a lot of specialized strategy boutiques as well, which will do the type of work that is mainly strategy consulting. And then there are also firms like Accenture, where I work, and they have different divisions. So they have a different strategy division, they have a different consulting division, and you can apply directly as a strategy analyst or a consulting analyst. But even when you're in the firm, there is flexibility in the first few years to move around based on what your skills are. So it's very dependent on the firms that you apply to and the firms you end up working and how it works within those firms. But I think like just at the starting, if you're interested in consulting, it matters, but it doesn't matter too much which type of consulting you do, because a lot of the skill sets that you have to use are the same. So you end up learning a lot of similar skills. And as you do more work, you also realize what you like more, right? And you can make the move even a few years down the line. It's not something you have to decide straight out of uni.
I guess like a natural question to ask is, what about you? Like, why consulting, and how did you find yourself in the position of applying for consulting, and how did you go about that decision? So just for some context, me and Neeraj, we both went to UCL together, so did Angellika actually, but in different years. And I remember, applying for jobs. I was in first year. I applied for 20 something spring weeks, didn't get any. Was applying for summers in my second year. I don't think I got any summers either in second year, and it really things only turned out okay in third year when I was applying at the end of my degree. But I remember those days when like we were in the student center and we were applying, and I remember a certain day when you were kind of doing an all-nighter for a assessment center the following day. And I remember it's because of uni and we had exams and all kinds of things, and it's so difficult to manage time. But I remember that was for something in sort of investment banking or investments. So how did you kind of like navigate all the applications and then find yourself in consulting?
Yep. That question basically describes our uni life. So how did I end up with consulting? It was a process, because as you said, right, we started in econ, and a lot of our peers really were interested in finance. And like one of the first questions when I was asked when I entered UCL was like, have you applied to any spring weeks? And this was in the first ever class I attended at UCL, and I just sat beside someone, and like that came up so quickly in the conversation, and I was like, what are spring weeks? What's this like spring week thing? I didn't even know what investment banking was. I didn't know anything. I'd seen movies where you go to college, you try different things such as like art and music and whatnot, and like you think about jobs like right when you're about to graduate. Like that was the image in my head.
So when you applied for economics, you applied for economics, to study economics and to be an economist?
I had no idea what I was doing, to be honest. But yeah, I did econ at A levels, and I thought it was cool. And to be honest, I was very confused on what I should apply for. And like, I just sat down with my parents and my teachers, and I was like, right, guys, like, you need to help me out. I don't know what I want to do. And then like I kind of thought about it and settled on econ. But like I had no idea what I wanted to past my degree at UCL. So yeah, I came there, and it was also finance, right? So I looked into what investment banks were, and to be honest, I thought they were quite cool. So I talked to a lot of people that worked there. I talked a lot of our peers in our class were quite interested in it, so I talked to them as well. I thought it was cool, and in the first year I was quite convinced that I wanted to do investment banking. And in second year, I remember I just started and I saw this application post on Facebook from a friend about this London strategic consulting thing. And I was like, okay, what's that? Sounds cool. And I spoke to her, and she said that it's basically a student-run society where you can do short 8-week projects with like real clients. So we had clients such as Brett, Hilton Hotels, Deliveroo, and so on. So you can do projects where you help these clients with their strategic decisions. And I was like, you know what, that sounds cool. Sounds very businessy. I like business. Why not? And I did a project there, and I really liked it. It basically took a lot of the analytical skills that we learned from economics together with a lot of the business acumen that I'd gained through various sources. And I'm the sort of guy who goes on YouTube, and my YouTube suggestions are oh, why McDonald's is a real estate company, right? So a lot of business knowledge from really strange sources. It all just came together in that project, and I thought that's quite cool. And which is when I thought maybe consulting is a good career. And then I had a mentor in that project, and I started speaking to him because he also worked at Accenture, and I was like, okay, so what do you do? How's your work like? And we met a couple of times, and he explained to me what consulting is, what Accenture does, what he does at Accenture. And I thought that was cool, and I ended up applying to the firm because of it, and next thing I knew, I'm a consultant.
So you did this first project in your first year, or was it second year?
Second year.
Second year. And how did you find this opportunity? Is it still ongoing? You said you found it on Facebook?
Yes. So I'm pretty sure it's ongoing because I actually, after I did the project with them, I ended up going on the committee for London Strategic Consulting. So it was my job to essentially build a lot of our partnerships with our firms such as McKinsey and Accenture to make sure that we keep getting mentors and reach out to different clients to see if they were willing to have students work on 8-week engagements with them. And it's something that's really grown quite well. So, and I'm not sure exactly which unis we're in at the moment, but pretty sure we're in UCL, LSE, a lot of these big London universities. And it's a good opportunity for students to just try something out.
That sounds great. So students can actually do it right now.
Yes.
And how is it called again?
It's called London Strategic Consulting.
Okay, yeah.
It's interesting because even in the last episode, there was this overall underlying theme of it was, we had Ingmar Klein, who was the founder of this startup called Hustle.
Okay.
And he was talking about the importance of mentors as well. He was like, I had this mentor and he kind of guided me. And now I'm starting to see that Neeraj also had a mentor who kind of directed you in that direction. Here's something that's interesting. How important is it for people to kind of try and find a mentor that helps guide them, especially students who are from backgrounds which are, say, less privileged in the sense that you don't get access to people naturally, your parents' friends are in the industry. So how important is it for people to actually try and find a mentor?
I think it's extremely important to have a mentor, but I wouldn't say that it's something that students need to try and find, because it's something that comes very naturally. I think the best mentors are ones you find when you're not really looking for a mentor. So for me, I didn't even know what a mentor does, to be honest, right? And I just knew that this guy was nice when I met him, and actually gave time to talk to me at different networking events when people right, at UCL, there would be probably 200 students for 5 people who come from different companies, and I almost felt sorry for them. I'm I remember speaking to him, and he was just really sweet. So I thought, if I want to know about consulting, I want to know from this guy. So I spoke to him. He was very passionate about what he did, and I've ended up finding it quite cool what he did. And that ended up being my foray into consulting, and he's still a good friend. So he's first a friend and then a mentor at this point. But coming to the question, yes, I think it's very important to have a mentor, just purely because it's someone you trust, and it's someone who's interested in the same things that you're interested in, and because they're in more of a mentor role in that relationship, they've actually done more, and they're kind of further along that timeline in that field, right? Like, and it's very good to understand what their experiences are, because they can be very honest with you. It's very helpful for you to ask them questions that are very like specialized to you. So anyone can look at YouTube videos and whatnot and to understand a bit more, but that's more generic, right? Like when you have a mentor, it's a lot more contextual, because they know you and they can guide you in a particular way. And like, who don't like friends, to be honest? So I think it's a very important and a very nice relationship. And I've noticed that it's not a one-way street at all when it comes to mentorship, because there are a lot of ideas that you can bounce off them that you end up working together. There are a lot of ideas they can bounce off you and you end up working together. There is so much give and take even in a mentor-mentee relationship, and it's not only, oh, let me meet you and let me learn from you. It's more, let's talk, because we are similar people interested in similar things. And I think that's something that's quite cool, and that's very important. And especially, as you said, right, like from people who don't come with as privileged backgrounds, where your parent can just hit up the MD at JP Morgan and be like, right, can you give him a job, right? It like for them, like even if say like it doesn't work that way, where like someone can just give them a job, but like someone would just at least be willing to talk to them and like give them a lot of context on like what they do and stuff, and give them very, very good guidance on like the next steps they can take in order to achieve what they want to achieve. So I think for anyone, privileged or not privileged, it's a good relationship to have, but especially if you don't have those connections already in the industry, I think it just becomes all the more important.
That's super interesting that you really, it feels like you really enjoy it. And I think Manu also mentioned that you also are a mentor for other people, so you enjoy helping them too.
So, I mean, that comes from this, again, more context, like that there are so many people which I've actually sent your way, you know, people who've been applying, people from Sri Lanka and stuff, that I've been like, oh yeah, this is great guy that you have to talk to. And just the fact that I've sent so many people your way to talk to you and figure out their applications in their life tells me that like you do this for other people as well. Yes. And I know you did it for me as well. When we were applying, we would do mock interviews. I remember like I was looking at how you were preparing for those assessment centers and stuff back in the day. And I mean, you've like looked at my stuff as well. You've helped me. So it's an assumption, but I can only guess that you do help a lot of people. And so maybe a little bit on that, like what do people generally struggle with, and what are the quick fixes that a lot of people can do?
No, absolutely. And I do like to speak to a lot of different people who you know are going through something that I went through a couple of years ago, right? And like it's only fair because when I was a bit lost, I spoke to a lot of people who guided me a lot and like who gave me all that support. And I think in just by looking at how competitive these jobs and like entry level jobs, right? These are not like MD positions, these are analyst positions. And just looking at how competitive these are, I think it's very important to kind of just get the knowledge back, just because you know how much you would have struggled without it. So yeah, that's why I do it, and it doesn't take a lot. Like a 30-minute call like makes all the difference, right? And to answer your question on what a lot of people struggle with, it's first of all like just getting some context behind the kind of work we do. And I'm realizing, especially in consulting, like this really, when you ask what is consulting to different people, you'll get different answers. Like you will never get the same answer, just because the work is so broad and there's just so much, and everyone's experience is so different in consulting. So you know, like when you like every YouTube video that I'd seen about the day in a life of a consultant, the answer was it depends. Like I'm like, thanks, that's very helpful. So yeah, so just getting a bit more context on like what the different industries are. I think that's something that people kind of struggle with a little bit, and secondly, also in how to position themselves, because at the end of the day, right, like a lot of the people we meet, they're really smart, like let's be honest, right, like because um, a lot of our friends are from UCL, a very selective university, a lot of different London universities that like we do a lot of like sports with, or like we end up coming across because friends of friends would be like King's, LSE, Imperial, and you're into your job, you'll meet people from Oxbridge. Like what? They're smart. Like these are selective universities. So when you're applying to the same jobs, for the recruiter, the way I see it is that it's a lot of smart people, and you just don't know what to hire because everyone is good technically on paper, and everyone has the experience that's needed to do the job well. But at the end of the day, if you have 5 slots, you have 5 slots, right? And that's also something people struggle with on like how they can tailor their experiences and how they can position themselves to be a good fit for that particular company, because there are so many different companies, and like a lot of them like in a consulting firms do consulting work, right? Like so they're very similar in that sense, but each company will also have their own USP, and like how you can connect to that is also very important, and that's something that I've seen a lot of people kind of have questions about. And finally, like assessment centers, like that's a big thing on like how to do well in an assessment center, what are the do's, what are the don'ts, and I think like these 3 things are quite important, like when it comes to all this process.
We can probably talk more in detail about the assessment centers and application process in a bit.
Yeah.
But since you touched on a day in consulting, could you actually describe your day, how it would look like?
I'm going to be hypocritical and say it depends. Yes, so it depends on what you're working on and what your role is, because I've done a few projects at Accenture by now, and in each project my role has been different. So there are projects where I've done a lot of number crunching, a lot of data analysis, a lot of data visualization, but there are projects there where I've just been doing a lot of stakeholder management. So it depends on what sort of project you're working on a lot, and what your manager is and what your role is within the team, because that also changes. And that's what makes consulting so unique and exciting, right? Because the next day you can turn up and the skills that you're using are completely different to what you were using yesterday. And that's something that really dragged me to consulting straight out of uni, because now's the time to learn, right? Like, so why not do something super broad? Why not do something super exciting and impactful at the same time? And also for context, a day in the life is very different post-COVID from pre-COVID, because consulting used to involve a lot of travel before, and like you would like see people go to client site on like Monday morning and come back Thursday night, and just spend all that time in a hotel. But nowadays it's a lot of work from home. So I actually have never been to a client site yet. So I've done it either from my own home or the Accenture office. So so it kind of depends on that. But in my personal experience, it's been, you wake up and you need 5 alarms to wake up, by the way, because I'm not getting up at the first alarm. You make a breakfast and you start the day with a stand-up meeting where you're just speaking to your team to discuss what was the work that was done yesterday, what's the work that needs to be done today, and if there are any dependencies, if anyone needs any help, and all that stuff. And then you kind of get into your job. So when my job was to do financial modeling and number crunching, I used to look at like what my model is at the moment, what would be the target state of my model, what data do I need, who do I need the data from, so reach out to all these people, and as I keep getting the data, clean it, put it in my model, see what the results are, and like keep iterating until I have the whole model. There was a project where I was leading the whole engagement, so I had a lot of responsibilities where I had to do a lot of client talks, so to build the relationship with Accenture, to plan the project. So what should the project plan look like, what should the project scope look like, and just talking to them about various updates through the day and so on. So a lot of calls. So that was a long project, to be honest, because you have to do all these calls, and after that, like, you have to do the actual project. So it depends a lot on what engagement you're working on, but overall it's very exciting. You almost always end up learning something new, if not every day, but at least every project, and I think that's quite cool.
So how soon are you able to actually work with clients when you enter consulting?
That's a good question. I think it depends a lot on what your project is and who your manager is and how the team is structured. Because for me, it was my second project. So my first project was mainly just me working with my team, but that's also because we had a big team and we already had a client point of contact. So in my first project, it was basically me and my manager, and we would have our internal calls, and like I'd be on some of the client calls, but like you don't really speak. You're just like, there, camera off, on mute, just like silent. But in my second project, I was speaking directly with the CTO of the company, and like I would have like one-on-one meetings with him where I'd be like I have to basically drive the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite a jump, and that's an experience that's very personal to me, because I know people who've had some level of client interaction on their first project, and I also know people who haven't had client interaction for like 4 projects in a row. So it depends on the structure, but I do believe that in consulting generally, client interaction comes a lot sooner than many of the other roles, because for me, barely a year into the firm, I was in charge of leading an engagement, which means I have to build that relationship with the client, to plan for a project when I have no idea what I'm doing, to structure the whole project, to determine the scope. And like clients love to add scope to the project, right? And like you have to push back, and like it's difficult to do that when you haven't really been at the firm for too long, right? So, but like that's the cool thing, right? Like, because you're put in the deep end and you have the support when you ask for it. So I think it's very important in consulting to know that when you're feeling a little bit outside your comfort zone is great, because like that's where you learn the most. But also at the same time, when you're feeling overwhelmed, like ask for help. And that's something that I learned through that project, because like that's not something analysts usually do. I got the chance to do it, but at the same time, I also know there's something I'm equipped for and there's something I'm not equipped for. Not to say that like I can't do it, but I will have to ask for help to do it. So to answer your question, it really depends. But in generally, like you can get client exposure quite early on, and like as long as you keep performing well, the team will give you more and more responsibility, and they will place more and more of their trust on you. And like it can start with you being like a silent like bee on the client calls, to you speaking with the help of your manager, to you speaking and your manager being a silent bee, and you're just like doing it all your own. So that's typically how it works, and you jump to the stages rapidly, just as long as you keep doing well whatever you're doing, and you keep asking. Like you have to be proactive. So I remember I told my manager, I was like, you know what, I feel like I'm ready, so why don't I take the next client call? And like you can be there if there's anything, like just jump on, right? Like, and that's what we did, and it was fine. So as long as you're proactive, like I think it can happen quite early.
All right. And when you are proactive, how quickly can you actually progress in consulting, and how the career progression actually goes?
That's a good question. I think it's not only limited to consulting, but at any role, as long as you're proactive, as long as you keep outperforming, as long as you keep having honest conversations with your supervisors, that you know what, this is where I want to be, this is what I'm doing, what am I doing well, what am I not doing well, how can I work? As long as you could regularly have these conversations, any career you can progress very well. The levels that are in consulting, I think they depend by firm in terms of what they're called by name. But for Accenture, we will have analyst, which is where you join straight out of uni, and then you get promoted to consultant, which is like the post MBA role, or like once you're an analyst for a couple of years, you get promoted to consultant, which is associate when you kind of compare it to banking terms. Then you get promoted to manager, where who usually are kind of responsible for client engagements and client relationships. Their job is to essentially manage the project. And then you have senior managers who work across multiple projects. So they do a lot of the selling and selling of work. They build a lot of project proposals, and they usually have this subject matter expert role in a lot of the projects that they sell. And on top of that would be MDs. So they similar to senior managers, sell a lot of projects, but their role is almost always purely advisory rather than kind of going deep into the operations of it, because senior managers still need to know what are the project's day-to-day operations, what's the day-to-day status, but managing directors are more towards what projects can we sell, what does, how's the overall health and of the projects, and like what are the opportunities and building relationships with clients and so on. And I know that like even in MDs you can progress further. So like they can be an MD within a particular practice who can then become the global lead for like that. So like at Accenture, we have a lot of teams that are distributed by industries. So an MD within a consumer goods team in the UK can like progress into like the global head of consumer goods and like CEO and like so forth.
Thank you so much. That's really structured and well. Thank you.
In terms of like purely informational purposes, after consulting, what do people go on to do? Like in terms of, I guess you could call it exit opportunities, which is what the finance lingo is. But like even in terms of, I would assume that the skill set you do is very transferable to like starting your own business or to a whole bunch of things, because it covers the whole spectrum of business. Like you should move to a new country, here's the strategy, here's marketing, here's, it seems to cover so many bases. So out of interest, like what are the exit opportunities, and also like what's the sort of range of like salary range? Broadly speaking, super broadly speaking, the median income in the UK is what, 25k. Just like in terms of, I guess, informational purposes for the people listening.
So for exit opportunities, it's very varied, and you'd find like similar across like the general lucrative considered career paths such as like consulting, investment banking, private equity, and so on. But what makes consulting like grads quite lucrative for our like corporate strategy roles. So because we've worked for example, in consulting, like as you keep progressing, you keep getting a certain specialization. So you can start as a generalist analyst who work across multiple different teams, and you can specialize into a particular function. So for example, you can be an M&A consulting expert, or you can be a growth consulting expert, or you can even specialize in certain industries. So you can be an energy consulting expert or a consumer goods consulting expert. So because you are doing a lot of strategic thinking within kind of, and also building a certain expertise and doing the strategic thinking in that sector or in that lens, a lot of corporate strategy roles become very good fits for consultants post their consulting career. So a lot of businesses would have like corporate strategy teams that support directly into like the executive board and like the C-suite of the organization, and that's where consultants fit in very well, because say L'Oreal, I don't know they have it, but like for hypothetically, if they had a corporate strategy team, they would want consumer goods experts because it's a consumer goods company, right? And they would hire consumer goods consultants to support the chief strategy officer or something to support them in their strategic decision making. So that is a very good and very natural career path that I've seen people take. A lot of people move on to entrepreneurship, and actually one of my friends recently did that as well, where she was quite interested in sustainability, and she just ended up starting something on her own, because that's something she wanted to do, and a lot of the skills that she's learned was quite helpful because she specialized within growth strategy, so she knows how to grow businesses, and she will be able to grow her own business that way. So entrepreneurship is a good one. Even finance is something that can be quite natural to consultants. It doesn't happen as much as the other two, because when you look at finance, there are people who come from investment banking backgrounds, private equity backgrounds, who have a lot more financial modeling experience. But I've seen that happen as well, and I think for me that makes complete sense as well, because in consulting you do end up doing a lot of financial modeling too, because say you have to tell a client, we're going to save you 200 million pounds, for example. What's the math behind it? Like, you can't just say the number, right? Like, you have to do like a very detailed financial model to understand what their baseline would be. So for example, you looking at the way you're doing your costs and looking at your future growth projections and so on, you're gonna spend $1.2 billion in operations. But through this new strategy, through the various cost savings that we're doing, we can change this baseline and we can reduce this cost numbers to 1 billion. So that gives you 200 millions worth of saving, which involves a lot of this like data analysis, data gathering, financial modeling skill sets. So, and you are doing it in like business context, right? So careers like venture capital or private equity can be really good to do that, because the role of, say, venture capital firms are to grow businesses, and you have to again do some financial modeling to see what would be the desired growth, and like, you know, what can the future look like for the company, at the same time using your skills as a strategy consultant in order to grow these companies that you've invested in. So these are like some exit opportunities, and like I think like you can see something so random as well sometimes, and that's what's cool about consulting, right? Because it's a lot of, sometimes you have to do a random project and you're like, I would have never worked in this industry if I wasn't a consultant. So you never really know what you end up doing, but these are the general paths that I've seen people take.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of pay, I think it varies quite a bit when it comes to different consulting firms and different types of consulting, where I've seen strategy consulting to be slightly better paid than other types of consulting. And like in your first year, like I've seen salaries ranging from 30K to 60K. And so that's when you join as an analyst, depending on which firm you do, and if you are joining a particular team or if you're joining as a generalist. That increases as you go forth. I'm not too aware of like what salaries look like a few levels from them, but like, you know, once you get promoted, you make almost twice as much, and like you kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I'm sure that's something that's really useful, because I mean, a big problem is, you know, you look at industries and the types of jobs you want to apply for, but you don't actually have even a base case of like how much you're going to get paid, because the job listings never have it.
I had no idea.
Very difficult to find this information.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to move to the applications part.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any advice for students how to get a summer internship if they didn't do any spring weeks?
First of all, like spring weeks aren't the end of the world from what I've seen. Like they are very important, don't get me wrong, and they make your life a lot easier. They are helpful, like don't get me wrong, but they are not the end of the world. And I know a lot of people would have said that to them already, and I know they don't believe it. I didn't believe it. But the way it works, right, is that for me, spring weeks are basically a week-long interview to get a summer internship, right? Where you get to know a little bit about the firm, you get to put yourself out there, you get to show them, you know what, this is what I am, this is what I'm capable of. And if they like you, they give you a summer offer. It's very natural, it makes sense. But there's a reason why all these, and like spring weeks I've seen are mainly focused towards finance. Like it's not as big in consulting. But like even in finance, right? Like they still run the summer internship application. So they wouldn't if they didn't care, right? Mm-hmm. So like as long as you can show that like you are interested in the field, because we have to remember these are entry level jobs. They don't require us to have work experience. They require us to have interest. So if you're say at UCL, right, like we had like investment society, economics and finance society, and so on. So if you join like a finance society, something like that, it shows that like you're interested in that. And if you organize events such as like, I know UCLIS used to have like a finance conference every year where which you can attend, and like, or if you're a part of the committee, you can organize. And over there you get to know so much about what's happening in the world of finance, right? And that's extremely helpful, and you get to meet with so many people who are working in the industry. So as long as you keep doing something on the side, we also used to have an investing club or something at UC. I forgot what the name was.
Bloomsbury Capital.
Yeah. So if you do that, if you show to them that you're interested in the industry and like you've done something, even if it's a student club, like, but you've done something so within like the part of finance that you're interested in. So if you want to do asset management and you're in Bloomsbury Capital, like it shows that you like investing, like otherwise you won't do it. And I think the biggest thing is networking. I know it's a very annoying thing to do. I have done it, and like it's a bit awkward at times as well, but I think it's very important because of two things. One, it helps you learn more about the industry, and like that information is very underrated, because you wouldn't know you belong in an industry unless you speak to people and you get to know about what it is. Like I can think that I want to be an investment banker, but if I don't know what investment banking is, then like it's just a guess. Like I'm never gonna know. And secondly, like it shows proactiveness, and I think that's very important. And when you put yourself out there, when you get to know about all these experiences, you don't know, right? You might just end up getting a referral. And referrals, again, are very important when it comes to the application process. And even if it's not for a referral or anything, like when you get an interview and someone asks, why do you want to work for UBS and not like Citi or something, right? Like you need to have an answer to that, and your answer can't be, your website was cooler. Your answer, like, it has to be based around the people you've spoken to and whatnot. So I think as long as you do everything else that shows that you're interested in the firm and you're interested in the industry, I think that's fine. You don't need to have a spring week. Spring weeks help, but it's not that if you don't have a spring week, you're not going to get a job.
In terms of actual actionable advice, I found that the hardest part was really making a CV that stands out and getting through the door.
Yeah.
I thought that, I have things to offer, and this has been my interest, and yeah, sure, companies are going to love hiring me, and I guess a lot of people feel this, but then most CVs actually don't make it through the door.
Yeah.
You don't actually even get the opportunity to present yourself and present your case if your CV doesn't get through the door.
Yeah.
And so if you look online and type CV template or something on Google, it'll give you this template with a picture and like a description, and it's a wrong CV. It's not the standard CV that actually succeeds. I guess for students that are from backgrounds that maybe you're in a non-target university and you don't have an investment society on campus helping you and giving you a template, what does a good CV look like, and what does a good cover letter look like, and are cover letters even necessary? Like, how do you get your foot in the door?
Yes, so CVs, it's unfortunate. I get that, because I had the same CV, like a nice rosy CV with like my picture over there, a very long description on like what I do, and like how like I play tennis, and that makes me a great candidate for your role, and like all that stuff, right? Like it makes sense, because at the end of the day, your CV needs to be a representation of yourself, and you are so much more than just that internship at that company. So I get that, but what I've noticed recently is that for CVs, like they do have to follow a particular format, I think purely because there are so many applicants for the same role, and it just gives the person reviewing your CV a template to look at, and like it makes it easier to compare between different people, because they can be like, oh yeah, how do they differ in terms of education, how do they differ in terms of work experience, how do they differ in terms of volunteering experience. And we also have to realize that there are so many applicants nowadays, right? And like a lot of people who review the CVs might also have other things. So like, for example, if like a consultant's taking time away, like along with their project is reviewing your CV, they want to see things to the point. So a few tips for that are, keep it to one page. Like in consulting, like it's like, do not go over one page. That's the golden rule. Secondly, it just helps to like take away all the extra stuff out of your CV and like keep it down to like 3 key sections like education, work experience, and positions of responsibility. That's how I structured my CV. And within that, like highlight the most relevant experiences, because it's not a competition of who's done the most, right? Like, because if it's not relevant, then it doesn't matter if you've done 50 things, but they won't help you in the role that you're applying for. So select probably like in total across work and positions of responsibility 5 to 6 experiences which are relevant to the job. So I removed a couple of internships and a couple of positions of responsibility because I thought that they weren't adding as much value to my story as the rest were. And within each experience as well, like keep it to the point. And like some tips on that are to quantify everything you do, because say you in one of your projects you say you improved the operating model of a company that led to significant cost savings. That's a cool thing to do, right? But if you say did an operating model project and improved costs by 17%, that makes it so much more tangible, and that makes you stand out because it gives a benchmark of like the impact that you've done. And I think that firms really like to see that, because it just gives a lot more credibility as well to what you've done, and it shows that what you do can have a real world impact. So I think that's one thing that's very important. And secondly, it should be about what you did rather than what the project was. So saying you worked on an operating model project is a good thing, like you should say that, but you should list down what you did, because at the end of the day what firms are looking for is not the fact that you worked on all these things, it's that you've done certain tasks that give you the skills required for you to be employable in whatever role that they're searching for. So in an operating model project, say you did a lot of data analysis and financial modeling, so you would write it in terms of that gathered data requirements, reached out to client stakeholders to get a lot of data, and analyzed it and built a detailed financial model as part of an operating model project that led to like 17% cost savings for the company. That just really tells them what you did, what skills you've gained, and that makes your story a lot more credible when you're applying for jobs, because at that point you can tell what you are doing. So that would be my advice for the CV. But also like it's not like, I understand that it takes a little bit of life out of the CV, but I do think that it's important to show them who you are. So I still have a section on like my interests and stuff where like, so I used to play like national level tennis when I was younger. So I have that element in my CV to kind of just show that, you know what, like along with all of this, I do something else which is cool and which has made me the person I am today. And I think it's important to show. So that's CVs. For cover letters, are they important? To be honest, I don't know. Like, I have no idea, but wherever they gave me an option to add a cover letter, I did add a cover letter, purely because it's your one shot without an interview to explain to the firm why you are a good fit and why you want that firm. And I think that's an important message to communicate, especially when they say review 10,000 applications for like 5 positions, right? And it's very easy to just upload your CV and send in an application and that's it. But why should they select you to interview them when they don't even know that you know them as a company, or you're just seeing that, oh, I like asset management, this is an asset manager, blind apply. So which is why I do think it's important to write cover letters. And but yeah, like keep it short, right? Like they have things to do. They're not gonna read a whole essay behind why you're a good fit. So figure out what are the 3 key points on like what you value you can bring to the company. So actually the way I would structure a cover letter is in 3 sections, like why you're interested in the industry in particular, why should they hire you, and why you want to work for that firm in particular within this industry. So that's the way I structure my cover letters. And like it doesn't have to be too long, like in total probably 500 words, 600 words if you're stretching it, but like not longer than that for sure. and very structured in the sense that why you want to work in, say, investment banking, 3 reasons. Why you think you are a good fit, 3 reasons. Why do you want to work for a particular company, say JP Morgan, 3 reasons, and that's it. And that's your cover letter. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't have to be the best essay ever written. It just has to convey the main point and in as short words as possible.
Those are some amazing tips.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Neeraj. And since those applications, they're super competitive, and as you said, there are thousands of applications per 5 roles, would you say it is important to apply to many roles? Is it really a number game? The more applications you get, the more chances you get.
Yes and no. Again, like a very politically correct answer, but I will explain. Yes, in the sense that at the end of the day, like when you think about it logically, they can't sit and ponder a lot over the 10,000 applications that they see to see which 50 they interview, right? Like a lot of it does come down to chance. Say you've done, your experience is above an average candidate, your education is above an average candidate, you've really shown why you want to work for that company. So that can put you from like original 10,000 to say the top 500. But after that, like it does become a bit of a chance where it can come down to what particular values that the company values, and that might not be you, that might be someone else. Like it really depends on what that company stands for and what they're looking for. And even if that's not you, that's not a reflection on you as a person, it's just about the fit that you have with the company. So I do think it's good to kind of spread your bets a little bit, because this is something you have like little control over on whether or not you get an interview. After you get an interview, you have a lot of control, but like up until you reach that stage, like you just kind of hope for the best, right? But I would say, so which is why I would say apply to different companies, but the only caveat to this is only apply to as many companies for how many you can put in a good application. Because when you mass apply to like say 100 companies, like because you only have 24 hours in a day, and like say if you're in the final year of uni, you have stuff to do, like so based on whatever amount of hours you have, say you do 100 applications, they're going to be 100 applications, you can do it, it's not like you can't do it, it's just that they might not be as good as you would want them to be. And I think like for whatever applications that you do, like you really should prove that you are the best candidate. So if it's not 100, if it's like 20, 25, which I think I did in my final year, where I was convinced that I could put in a good application for, that's what I went for. And like for each company, I would do a lot of research to see what they do, what makes them special. And it's not like just like changing stuff in like a common template to like a different company, but like write a slightly more specialized cover letter or something like that for each company. So as long as you're able to do that, I would say it depends on particular people. I know people who can do that for 40 companies as well, and I know people who can do that for only 10 companies. So it's a very personal thing. But as long as you can put in a good application, you can do a lot of networking, and whatever applications you do, you're able to do all you can to maximize your chances of getting an interview. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Neeraj, specifically on consulting interviews, what are the key concepts that students should know when they walk into a consulting interview? And also, like, what are the hard questions that you could be asked?
Sure. So key concepts, especially for consulting, know your cases. Like if there's only one thing you prepare for a consulting interview, it's the cases. Because a lot of strategy consulting interviews will require you to do not just one case. Like I've had interviews where I've done 4 cases, which are essentially, to provide some context on what they are, they're basically like 30-minute to an hour long conversations that you have, where you are given a problem. So your problem can be that you have a client which is say a grocery retailer in the UK, and they've recently had a lot of profitability problems, and they don't know what to do about it. That is the case, and it's your job to solve the case, which would be to figure out why they're having profitability issues and what the client can do in order to solve these issues. So there are two types of cases. One are interviewer-led cases where they ask you particular questions. So they'll give you this context which you will have to note down, and then after that they'll keep asking you questions, and like usually it'll be structured in the sense of so it can start with what do you think could be the reasons why the client's having this issue. Secondly, could be, and then like you list all these reasons, and then they will be like, okay, the client has given you slightly more information. So it's a cost related issue. So what are the different ways in which this issue can what are the different reasons why this particular issue can occur? Then it can be, what can we do to solve it? So it can be a very interviewer-led question where they give you a question, then you answer it. But it can be very interviewee-led as well. So it depends on which firm you apply for. So certain firms will ask you to just take the charge, and then you will have to, once you get the case, drop a framework as to what can be the different causes. Then you ask them questions in the sense of, and then you can kind of communicate that to your interview and be like, okay, they're having a profitability issue. It can be either a revenue thing or a cost thing. And if it's a revenue thing, these are the certain elements I would look at. These are the certain elements I would look at. And then you would build a hypothesis saying that, oh, I think it's a revenue thing. So then you would ask the interviewer certain questions in the sense that, do we have data on if they've changed any pricing? Do we have data on the sales numbers and so on? So as you keep asking these conversations with the framework, and then like as they give you data, something will have to hit, right? Because it's a profitability case, and if your framework is good, you will have the problem within the framework somewhere. So when they tell you, okay, yeah, it's a revenue thing, our sales have been dropping, that's when you know, okay, so we are having a profitability issue because we're not selling as much. And then you kind of drive the case to figure out why they're not selling as much and what they can do to improve. So those are the two ways in which cases can be structured, and it's something that people prepare a lot for. So I've seen people prepare months before the consulting interviews for these cases, because they are very important for the firms to make a decision, because at the end of the day they are a short version of what a consulting project would look like, because we would have very similar starting conversations with the client, right? Like client would be like, yeah, we're not making profit, tell us what we can do about it, because that's basically why they would come to a consulting firm. So you have very similar conversations with the client, you ask for very similar data from the client, you think in a very similar way, and you ask and you give solutions in a very similar way. So it kind of tests your ability to be an actual consultant. So I think that's a very important thing when it comes to consulting assessment centers.
How would you actually recommend to prepare for those cases?
So there are different material you can use to do it. So there is a book by Victor Cheng which is very helpful. There is a book called Case in Point which is very helpful. There is a website called Crafting Cases which a lot of people use as well. So there are different ways to do it, and these are different ways to learn about casing and like what are the ways you can solve a case. And because the one key important thing in cases is to be structured. These resources help you build a structure. It's not necessarily about using a set framework, but it's about learning the different ways in which such problems can be solved, so that when the interviewer gives you a problem, like you can develop a framework to solve it yourself. So these are some very good resources, but at the end of the day, it's about practice. So you should find a casing partner that you keep doing cases with, so that like you know how it works in an interviewer setting. They can give you real-time feedback on what you're doing good, what you're not doing well. And once you interview them, you also realize what they're doing good and what they're not doing very well, and you can kind of help build each other up.
Amazing. Could you maybe give us an example of a question that you have been asked so far that was very challenging or very difficult, if you remember anything like that?
Aren't they all?
I personally find things like, how many windows are there in London? Like those questions, I find them really hard for some reason.
Consultants love it. That like you're gonna get something wacky like that in an interview for sure, because market sizing is it's a part of the case interview as well. So like sometimes you have to do market sizing of like the grocery market in the UK, which makes sense. But then there would also be interviews such as how many windows are there in the Shard, it takes you back a little bit, and these are particularly challenging, especially in consulting interviews. But at the end of the day, I don't think that looking for an answer. To be honest, I don't even think they know the answer themselves. But they're just looking at the way you think. So how would you structure that? So like when I think about it, I would look at, the different floors that are there in the shard. So that gives you an idea of like how many, like that gives you a base to work on. You'll think about how many windows there will be in like one floor. So if there are 2 windows per floor vertically, that's when you know that okay, there will be like, when you go up the shard, like there'll be say 60 floors and 2 windows per floor. So that's like 120 windows that are just like going up. And then you think about how wide the shard is, so you can kind of go from there. So all they're looking for is a structure where they can see how you're thinking, and that is it. I don't think they're looking for an answer, and that's very important to know, because like the fact that you know how many windows are there in the shard like will not impact your consulting thing, but how you think about finding the answer will.
I mean, I remember preparing at some point for these kind of questions, and it was things like how many people go on the London Eye every day, and like I would be like, I don't even know, are there 6 seats, 12 seats per round? How long is a round? It's 10 minutes, and then how many hours in a day? Then how many hours is it actually operating? Is it 9 to 5? And then multiply that out. But like you said, it seems like there's a way to structure it well, rather than, which I mean I did when I started, and I think lots of people do when they start, they just guess. They do this thing of just like 100,000 or something, just a random guess, which I guess is exactly the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, if they've put 30 minutes for asking you one question, they're not really expecting a 1-word answer.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. And like honestly, all they care about is how you are thinking it. Like, are you taking into account the different factors? How can you, because at the end of the day, right, like when you think about consulting, like there's so many unknowns. Even when we get all of the data that we need from the client, there are still so many unknowns when it comes to consulting. So much of it is about thinking in a very logical way to give good estimations for a lot of your outputs, and and when like a client wants to figure out the market size for, so let's say they want to enter a new market, and they want to think about how much is the best case scenario, how much money they can make. It's a very similar exercise, because there is no, like, you can't tell them, yeah, 2 billion pounds, but don't ask me any questions because I don't know. Right? You have to think about very similar things. You have to think about the population. You have to think about what is the demand for that particular product that they sell. You have to think about what are the competition. You have to think about what are the different, what are the price point, what are the different kind of income levels in the country that you do, and all of these factors come together to give you a very informed estimation of what their best case scenario revenue could be, and that is exactly what they want to see in a case interview like that.
Okay, thanks, Neeraj. We're moving on to the next section, which is kind of getting personal. So what was your like experience at uni in terms of like just navigating studies, balancing out your exams with applications? Me personally, I applied for 121-ish jobs in third year. I got 4 interviews, got rejected from 3, got 1 offer. That offer was pulled out because of COVID. So then technically it's 4 rejections-ish. And then one of my previous rejections reached out to me and was like, oh, since this is going virtual, we can actually take on another intern. And you were on the top of the rejections.
Sure.
So we'd love to have you on, and I'm so grateful to them.
One door closes, another opens.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so grateful for that opportunity, because that was something that, after like 121 applications, one thing worked out really. If you just sum down the story, that's what that comes down to. I guess like, what was your experience like in both, getting through uni, managing jobs, I remember you also cared about studies.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were like, oh, there are some people who are like, the job is the most important thing. I don't actually care about the grades I get.
Yeah.
But I remember you also cared about the grades you got. So what was your experience in terms of uni and applying for jobs?
The same. We're the same. It's difficult, right? Because I've noticed that the job hunt when you start your undergrad starts from day one, and I just feel that's like a bit too early, and it's difficult for like people, like especially like for us, right? Like we came from a completely different country. You're adjusting into a new culture. You are making new friends. It's such a different part of your life that's going on, and the fact that you're still adjusting to it, but you also have to manage your grades, but you also have to apply for jobs, but you also have to network and all that, and it's overwhelming. It's very difficult to do, but thankfully, I guess I didn't really know how important all this was, so in my first year I didn't really do too much, which was a bit helpful, but I was just like kind of figuring out like uni, like it was such a different experience from school, like coming from India to like moving to London, a place that I'd never been to before, like kind of just like adjusting and making new friends and just like having a bit of fun, really. Like that's what I ended up doing in my first year, and then I realized, right, so spring weeks have already happened, I don't know what I'm doing, let's kind of join a few societies and stuff. And then I ended up doing the London Strategic Consulting thing, and that gave me an idea of like what I wanted to do in my career and everything. And yeah, after that, like it does get intense because like there's still a lot of commitments that you have from university. Thankfully for us in economics, at least, where a lot of our grading was done at the end of the year, so for the first couple of months you can kind of get away with not doing as much. And that's what I did when I was kind of applying a lot, and I realized that the earlier you apply the better, which is something that I didn't know. And I ended up applying to like about 70 places for a summer internship, and then I got the offer from Fidelity. I was very grateful for, because I like had the best time in that summer internship. So that was quite cool. And I didn't get the offer until, so I started applying on the September, like so as soon as my second year started, but I got the offer like around February, March. So it was a long, like it was like a solid 6 months of like trial and error, and like it takes a lot out of you, and it's very difficult. And I've realized that it's about working smart and not working hard when it comes to things like this, because I did the same thing. I was like, what is the numbers game? I'll apply to as many places as I can. I'll see what I get. But a lot of these applications I would make without knowing what the company does and what makes them different. So when you apply for a McKinsey versus a BCG versus a Bain, I still put in the same thing. I was like, what, they're consulting firms, they're not really going to care. But they care, because they are different firms at the end of the day, and you have to tell them that how they're different and why they're different, and the reason why they're different is the reason why you like them. And if you can't communicate that, then like it makes all the effort just like kind of go to waste, because there are so many people who are applying and somebody will put in the effort. So in my third year, I decided to not do as many applications. I did only like about 25, maybe 30 at best. But that was also because I got an offer to come back at Fidelity. So I did have a backup, and I just applied to places that I really cared about and I really wanted to work at. And because I had such a good time at Fidelity, I wanted to apply to places where I could be sure that I would at least get an experience as fruitful, if not more. So that really drastically reduced the list down, and wherever I applied to, I made sure that I at least tried to speak to someone who works there. It works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes, right? Like at the end of the day, like you reach out to people, it's a two-way street. Like if they don't answer, they don't answer. But that's cool. Like at least like you put in the effort, and it worked out with Accenture, because I spoke to someone there, and like they liked me and I liked them and the entire company, And that really helped me position myself well when I was applying, and I ended up getting the job. And I thought maybe at this point, this is something that's better suited for my needs than the other offers that I got, and ended up going there.
Awesome.
Neeraj, would you say consulting is actually where you see yourself in the future, or would you like to change somewhere? Basically, tell us, where would you like to see yourself in 5 and 20 years?
Wow. Honestly, I don't know. I'm really enjoying my job at the moment, so I can definitely see myself doing consulting 5 years from now, like if I think about it now, and that's something I'll be quite happy with. But if anything I've learned recently, like there's so many new things that come up, and like life takes you so many different places where you don't even know exist. So like 6 years ago, if you had told me I would do my undergrad at UCL, that I would end up studying economics, that I would be working in London, and that I would be doing consulting, I would have been like, I wouldn't have believed you, because I didn't even know what half these things would have meant, right?
Whoa.
So as of now, like as long as I am taking new challenges, as long as I am learning every day, as long as I am growing every day, and just overall like having a good time, like I think I would be happy being anywhere, be it consulting or something else. But I wouldn't like I am open to seeing where life takes me. But as of now, like I'm having a really good time in consulting, so if it's probably that, like I would be a happy man.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
And yeah, in 20 years, all I really want is a golden retriever, so as long as I have that at school.
I would love a golden retriever. Yeah, hopefully when I get my own house, I'll probably have dogs.
That'd be cool.
And yeah, so I think that's about it.
Time
A
for
wrap.
the picture.
Yeah, and we usually take a Polaroid picture with our guests. So the last guest that came, Ingmar Klein, from the previous episode, guys, his picture is now etched in history on the wall, and we're going to take one more. And yeah, hopefully at some point we'll have a whole wall full of pictures. Thank you so much for coming on, Neeraj.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure this will be very, very helpful, not just for consultants, but for people in general.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome.
Picture. Are we recording the picture?
Yeah,
Or not
okay,
recording?
so technically the episode finishes now, but
Okay.
we're going to have a...
We'll see whether we will.
Yeah, whether we'll actually leave this part in.